Welcome to What She's Worth, the podcast dedicated to empowering women, amplifying bold voices, and challenging the status quo. This show offers candid conversations about leadership, career growth, and workplace equity. Featuring inspiring guests from industry leaders to rising changemakers, we celebrate ambition, advocate for equality, and provide actionable tools to help women thrive. Join us as we dismantle barriers, build confidence, and own our worth. Because knowing your worth is just the beginning. Owning it changes everything. Hey everyone, I am so excited to introduce today's guest. As usual, I'm Ashleigh, and today I'm going to be talking to Tifarah Pardue. Tifarah has been one of my good friends for quite a while. We've worked together on several occasions, so I'm really excited to introduce you to her. As the Director of Continuing Education and Innovation at Florida Gulf Coast University, Tifarah works on talent initiatives across the university. As part of her role, she works to develop micro-credentials and other professional development programs that address the skill gaps across various industries. She serves on several committees focused on regional and collaborative approaches to address workforce development in Southwest Florida. Originally from Arizona, she and her husband have called Fort Myers home for almost a decade and have an 8-year-old daughter. In addition to her professional roles, she is an occasional runner, a working mom, and a workforce development champion. She is also pursuing her EDD at Florida Gulf Coast University and studies workforce development trends and employability factors. She received her master's from Colorado State University in English and worked as a composition instructor and program administrator before focusing on community outreach, fundraising, and program development work for underserved populations. I can't wait for you to hear our conversation, which is actually going to be in 2 parts. We talked for so long and had so many great things that we wanted to share with you that you're going to get part 1 today and part 2 coming next. Tifarah Pardue, welcome to What She's Worth. I'm so excited you are here with me today.
Thank you. So excited to be here.
Yeah, how's it going?
It's been good. We've
Good.
been busy. It's been a good year so far.
Good.
Excited to kind of head into March. So
Great. Yeah, I can't believe it's March already. I don't know how that happened, but that means it's also Women's History Month. So we love that month. It's also my birthday month, you know.
Well, then it's the best month ever.
Yeah, no coincidence there, right? So, all right. Well, I want to hear all about you, and I know we have a great conversation in store today. So I would love to start with a question about your work. So it's all about innovation and education. I want to know, was there a defining moment that made you say, this is the space I can make an impact? Because it's a very unique space to work in. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so for reference, so really what my role is I always say that I am like the shepherd for a lot of these projects that we work on. And so I always have also framed that as I have a skill, and that skill is working with incredibly smart people and helping them to craft messages that are accessible so that the knowledge they have can be accessed by other learners, regardless of kind of their background. And so that's a big part of why I do what I do, and I think why this role in particular that I'm in now has been so exciting. So I really work through the framework of micro-credentials to bring programs out into the community, but I work really specifically with employers to do that. And that's a little bit different because in higher education, the strategy used to be that higher education experts were the experts, and we would sort of come up with those ideas and define those gaps and then tell industry what their gaps were and what they needed. At our institution, we have flipped that model, and it really is based on the employers coming to us and us sort of negotiating what that learning outcome needs to look like, both for the learner as well as the company. And so that's really been a big part of my passion in taking on this work. And that it's an extension of work that I feel I've been doing for a long time, even though the concept of micro-credentials, while not entirely new, is certainly taking on new life as it exists now within the market.
Yeah,
so exciting transitions.
Definitely. I love that, one, you were talking about kind of flipping the model where now it's like, yeah, in universities, we're not just like, here's what needs to be done, but we're like, you tell us what needs to be done and we're going to help bridge that gap. So can we double click on the micro credentials really quickly, because I think we're going to have some people listening to this who don't work in higher education or maybe don't know what those are. So can you explain in kind of layman's terms, like what are micro credentials and how do they help people?
Absolutely. So micro credentials are, by definition for our institution, short-term programs that are really addressing specific skills and competency gaps. We have a couple of different ways that we do that. Some are aimed at traditional student populations, and some are a bit more focused on industry professionals who are already working. But the biggest piece is that it's breaking down what would be, I think, considered maybe parts of a traditional degree program, maybe parts of a more advanced certificate. Maybe there are skill gaps that really haven't been addressed in other trainings across an organization. And we're really working directly with partners across different industries. So not just one employer makes up our healthcare sector, but really asking the question to go one step above an individual employer. What does the industry need in order to be better equipped to manage the things that are coming to us? We know that technology is changing the way we work every day, and it is not always realistic for higher education or anyone to wait those 4 years until you can put new curriculum together, because industry is evolving so quickly. This has really been our pathway of getting directly to the heart of the problem and really see what's happening in real time with industry partners and use that to influence how and what the program should look like and how we bring them to the market, because the learners are just as important in that. We want them to have that recognition that they've put in the work and they're learning new skills, and really help them using this format to be able to advocate for themselves once they're in industry or working to get that job. How do these skills that they've learned directly connect to some of those positions that they are thinking about in the future?
Yeah, so I love that you are, I mean, I guess I should just start by saying that universities and education, I mean, we both work at a university and we can be notoriously slow to make things happen. So like you're talking about curriculum changes and that kind of stuff. If we want to change a major or add a class, like there's a whole process, and sometimes it takes a year before that curriculum change comes in. If you want to do a major overhaul, it could take a while. So you're really filling some gaps. But I also love that, I mean, the way that I understand this, and of course I work with you sometimes too, right? But the way that I understand this is you're solving some big problems. You are helping learners get skilled in something that is going to get them hired. And you are also doing it in a way that fills gaps that employers are seeing, where they're saying, we're trying to hire people, but nobody has these skills. And so you're taking the whole cycle and you're coming up with a solution to it. Can you give us like an example, or like one or two short examples of like what one of these would be called, or like what they focus on?
Yeah, absolutely. So first time supervision is a program that's growing in popularity. We have that program available completely online, but we really build our model off of case studies. So examples of where a first-time supervisor is dealing perhaps with issues in managing their team, or issues with trying to really adjust from being a peer within that organization to being a leader. But we do that in a way that is unique to each organization or industry if needed. So while we have first-time supervision in logistics, they may have different competencies and different risks associated with bad leadership if you really break it down from someone working as a registered nurse and leading a team in a healthcare setting. The risks can be much different, and so the ways that those leaders need to respond to different things might shift dramatically between those two, but we don't make that determination. We really ask our employers, based on what their needs are and what the industry needs are, what that looks like. And so part of our model is also really collaborative. We've really been able to address these through more of a collective impact model of work. So really bringing teams together and making sure that they can have shared understanding about what the goals are, and then working through those challenges and through those opportunities with different leaders and experts at all different levels to make sure that what we deliver is something that works for the learner and the employer. Because again, if we miss that mark, then we haven't done our job.
Wow. This is really powerful.
It's fun.
Yeah.
It's fun,
and it's
too.
fascinating because it sounds like you get a whole bunch of variety. Like you're in a bunch of different industries, but you're really connecting people. I mean, you're changing lives and you're changing workplaces at the same time. That's
which
great.
is right where I want to be in terms of the things that I'm passionate about. And so I'm in a position now where I get to use all these other skills and really do this job well and in a way that's sort of authentic and me and also meets a lot of our other goals. And it takes a special type of personality to be able to respectfully get really smart people to translate that really smart knowledge and make it accessible, because that's something that is not always the easiest.
Right.
And so I really enjoy doing that and just breaking things down, because it doesn't have to be this crazy big first step for so many things. And learning is not something that we should be, making impossible or difficult to do.
Yeah, gatekeeping for sure. So I want to quickly revisit. You mentioned the example that you mentioned was the first-time supervisor. You don't know this because the first episode of this podcast hasn't come out yet, but as I'm introducing what she's worth, I kind of talked about one of the capital letter, proper noun, systemic issues that some women face. And the one I used as an example as like a, did you know this, is the broken rung, which is basically that women are less likely to get promoted, like their first promotion to manager from the beginning, which is why, one of the reasons why we see such like small percentages of C-suite level.
Yes.
And so I love that you are providing this program that not only delivers trained supervisors to organizations, people who have actually, learned about, leadership theory and what to do in this situation from actual case studies, but you're also offering people a tool to say, look, I can be a supervisor.
Yeah.
Because sometimes, and especially, for women, that can be a tough first step just because of the barriers in place.
It shows something different when you take that time in your personal space to do that training, knowing what could be in front of you and to be prepared for that future moment. It may not be your now moment. And I think that's what I like, is that it sort of positions itself with many of our trainings right on the cusp of someone's changing moment, and their next goal is visible, even if it's just on the horizon. And so it's such an exciting place to be. And I know you get to see that so often in the work that you do. But for me, it's just a much different way of doing it. So it's exciting to see you bringing it into the limelight some more.
Yeah, I love that we're getting to talk about this, because there's so many people out there who are thinking like, what is my next step? But maybe you don't have supervisory skills until you've been a supervisor. And I know this is just one example, but like, how can you make that next step if you haven't been given the chance? And so making these programs accessible is, I think, awesome. So.
And let's start failing fast and not on human beings if we can learn some of those things. I think that would make a lot of people out there a lot better and happier in their roles if they weren't like the human guinea pigs of supervisory skills.
Yeah.
Because that does seem to be the model we've used in the past, is that it's like, we're going to train you to do this, but not really. Your training is that we picked you, and then you get some short-term kind of pat on the back and assessment perhaps, but you're off and running before you've really even finished doing any of that work.
And that's so true. I mean, as somebody, I'm currently in a supervisory role, but as somebody thinking back on the first one that I had, and again, I know this is just one example of these programs, so I can only imagine the impact you're making, but as somebody thinking back on the first time I was a supervisor, I'm like, oh my gosh, I finally got this job. Like, this is the next step in my career. This is great. But then you show up and they expect you to know exactly what to do. And yes, maybe later down the line, I'm supposed to, get to know everybody on my team and talk about their strengths and, how we work together best, and like really diving into this goal setting and the structure, and even I think about even just knowing that managing people is now a huge part of your job. Like you need to actually set aside time to manage people and have meetings and deal with conflict, and that kind of stuff is something that I think a lot of first-time supervisors don't realize. And actually, having been an instructor of one of your
Yes.
first-time supervisor classes, like knowing the content that's in there, I think that you're giving everyone a leg up. And I mean everyone, the like I mentioned, the employer, right? But the person who doesn't know what to do, who's like, okay, I got this job, this is great, but now I have imposter syndrome because like what do I even do?
Right.
How do I even actually manage someone because I've never done it before?
Yeah.
It's something that you want and you have to learn, and it can feel very lonely. It can feel kind of scary sometimes. And so I love this example. But I want to ask you, this is very unique work that you're doing. I want to know like how you got here. Like how did you find your way to such an interesting and unique space?
Yeah, so that's a good question, and it's one that I get asked a lot. Primarily because I think the roles that I've had previous to this, for everyone else, don't seem sequential, but for me, seem absolutely a part of a thread that I've been trying to follow for a long time in my career. So for context, my background training, I have a master's in English, and so I started off as a composition instructor, working at community colleges and also teaching kind of library research methods for Colorado State University during grad school. I did a lot of work with at-risk populations, typically young women, in either rehabilitation programs or things like that. And so really working with populations that were, at risk quite often was really where my passion started to grow. My thesis was really on making space in higher education for non-traditional experiences and recognizing those within the classroom. And so this was over 12 years ago, 15 years ago, if I'm not dating myself too much.
Well, and I imagine when you were writing that, you weren't thinking that someday you're going to actually work in this space.
Right.
Because where even were those jobs at that point?
No, there was nothing really on my radar at this point, but I knew the people that I wanted to support. And I also realized in teaching for a number of years that I was so bothered by the things outside of the classroom that were holding them back. So I was pretty good at my job. I was known to be an instructor who would give the time at the end of the class, say 20 minutes. If they had real life writing that students were challenged with, that was kind of a barrier for them, they were welcome to bring it in and we would spend time if they were willing to share it with the class. And so much of what I got from my non-traditional students were really important pieces of writing that they just did not have the skills yet to know how to approach. It could be a conflict with their boss. It could be applying for a new job was a really common one. It could be just email communication and not knowing what the proper way to start those was. And it was every week I was so impressed by the questions they brought in, and I thought I can teach them to write these essays wonderfully, but is that enough for me to feel like I've done the most that I can with the skills that I have? And that's kind of been my driver through life, is that I know I have skills and I want to do the most that I can with those skills. And so after seeing those barriers come up again and again and again for people, and then addressing those gaps or working with them and seeing the response they had from getting that job or coming back to my room and telling me a year later that they were, moving forward with that company, or that it really helped them to understand something else that they were struggling with, I realized I couldn't stay in the composition classroom for my career. So I started moving into working with a GED and ESL program at that time. And I started really doing more student success work. And so program administration, calling a giant list of people, figuring out why they weren't in class, what their barriers were, if we could fix them, what to many might seem like a task was to me so eye-opening, because I got all of this information from all these different people who were just trying to get through a GED. That was the population I was helping. And I thought, my God, we haven't done enough. If this is how much they're dealing with, just to be able to get to the classroom to learn. And so I just, started wanting to address like all those other things. I'm like, I can teach writing, but so can many people. Truth be told, probably better than I can, because I am not as concerned about grammar as everyone assumes I am.
Sure.
So I just was driven to kind of take on these additional barriers. And my background was really, I would say, like middle to maybe lower middle class, maybe lower at times. And I made this assumption in that kind of turning point in my career when we moved to Florida. I knew the type of institution I wanted to work at, but I also had this idea that because I didn't grow up near or around money, money must fix all things, right? Because when you're broke, that's really an easier narrative to believe, is that like money can fix almost everything.
Yes.
And arguably, I will say to a point that is pretty true, is that there's a lot that money can do to fix things. So I went into more fundraising and development roles, and they liked me in those because I had the ability to present really well. I wrote speeches well. I did copy editing well. I was very organized. So I had all these strengths from these other roles that I was bringing to this new light. But again, it was not quite the perfect fit. I think I was probably a B average person in that role, because I just didn't quite get it. And I am not good with things when I don't get it. I really was not bad at the role, but I knew I wasn't going to see upward mobility in that area like I was really thinking. And I wasn't coming to work with that same passion for it either. So it's like out of 5 days, I can deal with 1 or 2 days that are really challenging, but when every day feels like a bear and there's no impact for me, I don't find a lot of joy in that.
Yeah.
And I think when you're in development, part of it is that once you get that gift, sometimes the model is that you move on and that person goes and that relationship remains either with you or with another person, but you're not seeing the impact like someone who's in the trenches doing the work. And so I really missed that.
You needed that student interaction.
I did. I needed interaction with learners, and that was sort of my touchstone on things if I felt lost. And I didn't realize that until I spent what was probably a combined total of 5 years in fundraising for 2 different institutions. Wasn't wildly successful at it in terms of getting, $1 million gifts, but certainly the portfolio that I had was moving forward and doing what it should. But it wasn't my A+ role.
Yeah.
And so that was a challenging thing to understand, I think, for my point at that time. But I made a big leap, and I told one of my supervisors at the time that I really thought, hey, there was this role that opened up. I realized it was opened and it wasn't for me. And rather than have a discussion about why I didn't apply for the role that you didn't tell me about, knowing that that was not really a role they wanted me in, I instead took the conversation and said, I'd really like your support, given how much I've put into this, for you to help me find where you think I will be successful.
Wow, that's a brave question
It's
to ask.
a big question,
But
it's a brave
love
question.
that you asked it.
Because I felt like it was a waste of everybody's time, because I was never going to be happy being a B+. I was only going to be happy with hitting that A. Like, I am higher education. I still have that in my brain. I can't help it.
Yeah.
But I also knew that this manager didn't want B+ on their team either, when they knew that there were others that could be doing it better. And so I did get a really strong amount of support from that person, including a direct introduction to an entire another part of campus, just to say, I think she's capable. It wasn't the right place for me to grow there, but I've had tremendous success just because of the honesty of that conversation. So that next role really was focused on College of Business, working with students, working with employers, talking about the skill gaps that our students might have in entering those internships. And so this next opportunity came up, and I took that leap. And it was a pretty big leap, to the point where I think Some were really surprised, and it was different from everyone else's perspective. But for me, it was an extension of the conversations that I'd been having since the start of my career in higher education. So
Yeah.
it was a natural fit, and it's felt pretty 100% like in sync. Notably, it's been a year, maybe a year and a half, and it feels like yesterday in some ways because it's still so exciting.
Yeah, so there were so many things in there that were just so amazing to hear. I first want to ask you, I don't think you're alone in finding yourself in a role where you're like, this isn't actually something that is super fulfilling to me. But what I do think was so interesting about that is that you were able to look at it and say, I'm not the best at this. And I want to, and instead of letting that kind of get you down or knock your confidence, you were so proactive in saying, you know what, I'm just going to like face this head on. I'm going to go directly to my supervisor and say, look, I know that this is happening. Where do you think I should be? And so with that, I think that's one of those experiences that can really, and not to deny you any of the
Right.
things that you went through while that was going on. I'm sure it wasn't all like sunshine and rainbows while you were
Right.
in that position. So
Yeah, real talk, no.
yeah, I'm sure it was hard, but you also didn't let it keep you down. You
Right.
found kind of, you mentioned options, and I know you're a very strategic thinker, so you kind of found your way out of that. So my question is, a lot about confidence, right? And so that can be a challenge for so many people. So like, was there a moment where it just kind of clicked for you of like, I want to find the right place? Like nothing's wrong with me, but I'm in the wrong place currently. So where do I become the right person in the right place? Like, how did you deal with the confidence piece of that?
Yeah. And that's such a great question because you can dig at that for a very long time and surprise yourself with the answers that you come up with. So, I think I try to take the ego out of things, both professionally and personally, because I find with my work, ego tends to lead discussions when you're talking with organizations, if you allow it. Everyone is wrapped up in like some trait that they identify with about themselves, like I'm smart, I'm this, I'm that. Mm-hmm. And I think that I look at that as a limiting belief because you're only seeing that one piece of you in that definition. Even if you've spent years cultivating what that is for yourself, it doesn't do enough to tell people what other qualities you have. And so with this, it's like, I think I just realized, one, not only in seeing myself and how those standard things were coming through, performance reviews, just senses of meetings where I was like, I could have done that better. I'm not sure I really got 100% out of that meeting, what they wanted or what I wanted. Mm-hmm. And that can happen as you're learning a role, but I think I consistently was feeling like that. And I also know my own pace for learning a job. Typically, I will spend a year getting to know the job entirely. And in 1 year, my second year in any role has been, I know what I want to change. And then by year 3, typically I've accomplished that change and I can either move forward and change other things, or I start hitting railroads and blocks. And that's when I know maybe this isn't where I can spend my time if I'm not going to be able to have an impact. Not to say that if I spent a decade in some of those positions, I wouldn't have, but that is a long time to do something that isn't 100% fit.
Yeah.
And I also really looked at my colleagues at that time. And there was, as with those roles, there's always a lot of turnover. That's a very dynamic part of any organization is fundraising. It's very crucial to how you operate, no matter what you're doing. If you're in a nonprofit, if you're in education, if you're in human services, it's such a critical and difficult role. It's misunderstood. But I also realized that there were people who did have my personality that were doing it and doing it well, but those people were not staying in the department as it was. And so I realized that the people that really did believe in me were leaving because they themselves weren't seeing a good fit with the leaders at that time.
Yeah.
And that is not to say that there weren't excellent people on the team and that they did have a good vibe with. It's that the team dynamic wasn't there to support them. And I realized, I think I'm in the group that keeps going, not the group that keeps seeing that upward opportunity. And so I said, okay, again, I could leave the institution as a whole. I could try my hand somewhere else and see if that's the best fit. But for me, education is the calling and learners. And so to try to address that gap in my own skills, but doing it somewhere else, it felt like the wrong path. And so instead it was able to focus on recalibrating what I was spending my time doing. And that changed the game. But you've got to learn to read what's happening around you also. And I've done a lot of that. And I've always had pretty open conversations about, what people are looking for. I work to find a lot of talent for others. I like to bring people together and have really dynamic teams. And so reading teams and how they're operating is not something that you can do just as a professional. It's also got personal value because I was like, oh no, all my people are leaving.
Yeah.
That means I think it's not going to work here because I'm not going to probably be able to change the whole way that this operates. There's some people that can. I knew it wasn't going to happen.
Yeah.
But if you can, be that person, but have the support to get to that level.
Right.
I was nowhere near that level.
Yeah, this is so. I'm sitting here thinking just like how amazing this conversation is because, I've known you for a while, right?
Yep.
And I imagine a lot of people, especially it's the beginning of this, the podcast is starting to go through our networks, and a lot of people who are listening in the beginning are going to know you.
Yeah.
And I feel like we all know you as this powerhouse, right?
Yeah.
Of like, you exude confidence. You're absolutely competent. Like you are, we just know you're somebody who gets things done. And I think it's really refreshing, and thank you for being vulnerable to talk about a time when maybe that wasn't the case, but instead I think it's really inspiring to hear you say that instead of thinking, wow, I'm not good enough, it was, how can I get to a place where I can, one, be happy, but you also mentioned something that I think is so important, and that is, where can I use what I bring to the table to contribute, to make an impact?
Yep.
I think so many people think of, what do I want in a career and that kind of stuff. And I think you'll always just be kind of stuck in this cycle of not having the fulfillment that you're looking for unless you're also thinking about, well, they probably want me in the right place too.
Yeah.
And how am I going to impact the rest of the world with the gifts that I have to bring? And I don't know, that just seems like the mindset that really changes the game in terms of, is this a me thing? Is this a confidence thing? Or where am I going to do the most good?
Yeah. And those can be true at the same time. Like sometimes it is a me thing. Like I'll tell you, some of those were me things where it was like me not quite getting it. And I can own that at this point in my career. It was not easy. And I don't like not being at an A for whatever I take on. So being at a B plus and like knowing that I've given it my 100% best effort and knowing that that B plus is the top mark for me, I can accept that. But continuously trying to like do that over and over again when it doesn't give me that fulfillment and it's farther from my mission was really the change of it, right? And it depends. For some folks, you can be highly impactful if you're a B plus in a room where what they need to consider is that perspective, right? So I always say that I'm the translator in a lot of my discussions. So I can work with people who are A plus experts in their field, but my contributions in these discussions when we're developing programs are just as valuable in helping them to get their program out to the right audience and in the right condition or package or profile or however it needs to be kind of created. I'm essential to those conversations. And I know now that where I am, it would not be happening in the same way if it wasn't me. And I feel really good about that contribution. And I always get to have that later kind of connection point where the learners, you get to see the impact. And that I love doing. And even though I do that more in the form of like reports now, I still am relying on a lot of those skills that I developed in teaching curriculum and teaching writing And to always having had a passion for creative writing, it's not as closeted in this role, right? It's something that I'm able to bring all these other pieces to it. And it's only possible because I said maybe that other thing isn't the best, right?
Yeah.
And so that's good.
That's so powerful. I love how you're saying, you're working in these industries. Like, let's take logistics for an example, right?
Absolutely.
I feel like there's a lot of people that maybe don't even know what logistics means.
Right.
Like, what even is that industry? And for you to be able to walk into a room with these people and have the confidence to say, I may not know your business, but I know the business of making what you do accessible to more people,
Yes.
and especially the people who you're eventually going to want to hire.
Yes.
How do I get more people in this room with you? And I'm going to be the one to, like you said, translate.
Yeah.
That's a skill right there that if you can identify, I have this skill of translating that to these people, you've leaned into that, and it's so unique and very cool.
And I'll tell you, I think a lot about how I developed that. And it really, my parents were very smart. My dad was like a really smart person. Didn't demonstrate it in a traditional career path, but was the kind of person that could pick up a manual in Russian and figure it out and put something together with it.
Whoa.
Brainy, but so brainy and so smart that very isolated from most people because he couldn't speak, I would say, like to traditional folks or regular folks without coming across, quite frankly, sometimes like a jerk. And he'll acknowledge that to some degree, but I learned very early that talking to people like that doesn't work.
Yeah.
And I could see it early. And so I knew I didn't like that. And for education, I think that's why I'm so passionate about changing that and why I was so drawn to even just English in general, because it's about code switching. It's about teaching someone to write for an audience. It's not teaching someone how to write the right way. And I'm so glad that we're moving away from that. But when I started, that was just the beginning. And so I was sort of this wild child in that space of, we're going to talk about this, but you have to recognize that if you use this language at home, what happens? And they're like, oh, yeah, I get laughed at. I'm like, exactly. So understand its place, and I'm not going to tell you that this is the most important version of language that you're going to come across. It's not.
Yeah.
And so it's just been exciting to kind of see that unfold.
That's so cool. And the liberal arts kid in me has to just, give a little shout out to the fact that you've taken a degree. I majored in psychology and theater, and I got all the time, what are you gonna do with that? What are you gonna do with those? And you've taken a degree like English, which I'm sure you had very similar. What are you going to do with an English degree?
The
You're gonna
only
be a
profession
teacher?
was to be a professor, because I was also very clear about not wanting to work with K through 12 because I really enjoyed working with adults. So
Right.
they were like, well, then the only path forward for you is being a professor.
Yeah. Well, and you've just carved out such a cool niche there.
I was
which
like,
is,
nope.
Yeah, you're like, nope, that's not for me. Which is funny because you also you have
Love
taught.
it. I love it. I love it, and I
college
miss
classes.
it. But again, it's not where I can do the most good right
Yeah.
now. One day I might get back to that. But right now, it is not where I can do the most good with the time that I have and the skills that I'm developing.
Yeah. So all you other liberal arts kids out there,
Yeah.
this is a good tale for you to listen to. But I want to move on a little bit. I want to
Yeah.
talk about networking, because you have mentioned other people several times throughout. I think one of the most prominent times that you mentioned it was, well, I asked my supervisor of, where do you think I would be a good fit? And I keep bringing that up because I just think that is such a cool experience. I think a lot of people would be afraid to do that. But I think that you are somebody who networks the right way. Like, you understand networking, and because networking can get a really bad rap. Like, a lot of people just picture like forced conversations and
Yeah.
awkward LinkedIn messages, or the ones I use with my students all the time. They kind of think that they need to slap on a name tag and like balance their hors d'oeuvres in one hand while they're shaking hands with somebody else, and then trying to, keep a conversation about the weather going for 15 minutes.
Yes.
But that's not what you do, right?
No.
So what is your take on building these authentic connections with other people that actually matter and that end up benefiting both of you, right?
Yeah.
Because connecting with other people is great, but I think where networking comes is like, how do you how do you build this so that ultimately everybody reaps rewards from it?
Yes. And I think that's so important. So I think it's so funny to me that is, and I've heard it numerous times, so I know that is the reputation that I have, but I did not go into networking feeling the confidence that I exude. To be fair, I've also in a classroom dealt with imposter syndrome, and a good outfit and a strong, like what I call my armor, will get you a little bit of confidence.
Good tip.
Just saying.
Yeah,
I
good tip.
have to be ready for the room to go into it. That's me. That's step one. And that's just like a mental preparation for something.
Yeah, feel like your best self before you walk in
I gotta
there.
like get in there and be ready for what's to come. But I think how I approach networking is a bit different, and it works for me and my strengths. So I am a person who processes things out loud. You've been the beneficiary of many of those.
Which I love. Keep it coming.
Yeah, it's who I am, and I will grab someone on a team sometimes and say, hey, I just need to talk through this idea I have because I'm missing something, and I just need a springboard to balance those ideas off of. And so I do that. But what I do when I'm networking is an extension of that. And I would rather have in a room of 100 people 4 good conversations with people that have interests and ideas that are aligned with mine, and continue those discussions in a meaningful way over the next year and leverage those, which is not a word that people like to use, but I do.
Right.
But leverage those connections for, I would say, shared goals typically.
Yeah.
It's rarely a goal of just my own because of the social impact nature of my work, is that there are very few things that I go into for just one purpose, and that purpose being me.
Right. I think that is a major differentiator between, I mean, we've probably all been to quote unquote networking events where we can kind of smell from a mile away, like the people who are just there to get something out of you.
Yeah.
Right. And I know leveraging can seem like a weird word. I feel like I hesitated when I said it a little bit earlier too, but we don't mean leveraging in a transactional way.
No.
I think the biggest mindset shift you can have about networking is that it's supposed to be for everyone's benefit.
Right.
It's not, I mean, I've had times where, I hate to say it, there's specific industries. I'm not saying everybody in these industries, but there are specific industries where I can almost count down from the time that they introduce themselves. I can go 3, 2, 1. Oh, we should get coffee next week so we can, chat a little bit more about, my finances and my state of whether or not I need insurance or,
P.S. If you're watching, that doesn't work. Stop doing it.
Yeah, you got to connect with us as people first.
Yeah.
Yeah, which you're very good at.
And it is that. And it's having had too many of those terrible conversations when I was really green in this space and not knowing if that coffee was worth my time, but also having a lot more time at those early years made it pretty easy to say, okay, sure. Mm-hmm. But my lack of patience for pointless conversation was pretty moderate at that point. I would say as I'm getting older, I have more responsibilities. I look at that time differently, and I think that shifted my strategy as well to where I didn't take the one-off conversation as readily as I did in the past. So if I'm at an event, I've already got an idea of what I want to do at that event or why I'm going. I'm not going just to go because I need more people. That is not typically what that's not where I am in my career. If you are, go to events that make sense for what you're doing. Mm-hmm. Don't just pick one at random. Unless your goal is to meet people that are completely outside of your scope to get more ideas or to just create new relationships. That's a strategy, but like for me, it has to be strategy driven. So I know kind of who-ish I need to talk to going in. And if I get those 4 good conversations, I'll give myself the grace to say, okay, next steps, like what do I need out of that? And then I, enjoy the rest of the event if I can't leave. I will have a random conversation with someone who I may not have seen the potential in building a relationship with, but sometimes that's the best part, is it's surprising.
Oh, I love that.
The moments when you're like, oh, that could be helpful. Or it's not even just for me. It might be that I meet somebody who's got a skill in an area, and I'm working with somebody else. I'm like, oh, you know what? That would be great. And so when I say it's leveraging, it's like I'm not just leveraging those connections for my own benefit, but like people will call me now just to ask if I know of someone who's looking for a job in XYZ. Those are people that are still a part of my network, and that even if they're not currently in the same role they're going to be in 5 years, like I still want to work with that person in 5 years,
right,
wherever they end up, because with my way of going about things, I tend to work with the same people. So I do make it a point to bring new people into that, so that what I'm doing isn't done in an echo chamber, but having the intention to go out and make relationships with people and knowing what you have the capacity for. I don't have the capacity to do 10 coffee dates in a month anymore. I really would rather not. And I can't even find the time to do that over, 10 meals. So it's not realistic. And I can do how many calls a day? 30 minutes? I would prefer an hour call if it's actually worth it.
Yeah.
And I find them so much more interesting, and you learn so much about other people's experiences that are deeper than you would get at that cursory event, where maybe your goal, you're a person that likes to meet 100 people and then follow the ones that stick. Mm-hmm. I get connected to people too much for that, because then I'm like, oh, I didn't follow up with that one person who was so great. So if I meet 100 great people at an event, I'm like overwhelmed, because it's like, oh man, the things I'm missing by not being able to follow that thread or that discussion. Like, so it sounds like think about them.
Deeper conversations rather than wider for you makes sense.
Yes.
And a few of the things that you said that really stand out to me is the, meeting 4 great people out of, that you align with out of a group of 100 doesn't mean that you failed because you didn't talk to 96 of them.
Yeah.
I also loved that you said that, you have intention going into it, and you will get deeper with those 4 people. I keep using 4, but using those 4 people. But that if you still have time, you will still go and talk to other people, because you never know.
Right.
There's this level of assumption, I think, that happens. And it's another thing that also drives people away, right? If one of those kind of people at a networking event that's ready to dive into their sales pitch, if I were to just be like, oh, you know what? I'm sorry, I'm not interested. Once they talk about it, they'll be like, oh, well, thanks for nothing. And then they'll kind of walk away, right? And I'm like, wow, they didn't even see me really as a human being, but more as an opportunity to make some money, right?
Yeah.
And so for you to be able to go in and say, well, you know what? I've got a little more time. Let me talk to 1 or 2 more other people. You never know where that relationship is going to go. You might help them later. They might help you later. But having the space and the capacity to maybe add a few in there where the benefit isn't completely obvious now is also a game changer.
And sometimes I think of it as like the equalizer, right? So I also try to find people that aren't looking like they're talking to anybody else and that maybe aren't having a good time.
Well, that's the first thing you did for them right now.
Yeah, because
save them from that.
Yeah, because I think, okay, networking can be very intimidating. And if you don't have the experience and you don't know somebody in the room, I want to at least give somebody new an option of saying they met one person. But again, the people that I'm seeking out are not the people who are talking to a million people. Maybe they're talking in a corner. Maybe the person they were just speaking to left and they were having a longer conversation. Maybe they're with an organization that I know a little bit about, but I'd love to learn more. And I always find that to be an extra bonus. And I don't want to rob myself of like all the surprises.
Yeah,
like that's
definitely.
The best part. I mean, like you've got to be open to something.
Some of the best things that have happened in my career have been surprises from somebody I met years ago, right?
Yeah.
Well, so I love that you mentioned, if you see somebody standing off to the corner of the room or whatever it might be, my first quick question for you, do you consider yourself more extroverted or more introverted?
So I am extroverted in that I process things with other people. I tend to verbalize much of my thought, and I really with the right people and people that are around me get energized. However, even around my favorite people, I recuperate in private.
Interesting.
And I have to have alone time to do that.
Yeah.
If my social battery is out, do not send me to an event with 100 people because I'm going to put on my fake face and my fake smile, and I'm going to go and do it, and I'm going to leave after my 4 because I just can't anymore.
Yeah. So first of all, shout out to knowing personality theory behind
Yes.
extroverted and introverted.
Yeah,
I
I'm
feel like
it's so this and this
yeah,
for me.
yeah. So it almost sounds like you have a pendulum swing, like right over top of that middle line of like
Yep.
sometimes I'm here and sometimes I'm there.
Yeah.
Well, so I sometimes I think that networking gets the rap of like, well, if I'm not super extroverted, this maybe isn't for me, which I hope introverted people don't feel that way. I'm very extroverted, so I'll just put that out there. But I hope they don't feel that way because, people want to, we want to talk to you, right? But the other thing is I know that it can feel extra hard to go and put yourself out there and, connect with people you don't know, especially if you're in a room with a lot of people, that can be really draining. So knowing what you know about networking and your experience with networking, what would you say for those who feel introverted or even outside like the quote unquote inner circle? Like what's one quick, like simple yet powerful move that you think they can make to expand their network?
Okay. So I'm going to break that question down a lot.
Okay.
Because I think we're in a time when technology is giving us a lot of ways to circumvent what has been the traditional way of meeting someone, which could be like going to a really traditional event. I think there's a lot of value in working through LinkedIn, watching webinars, finding great speakers that you align with within your organization. And if you really are introverted to the point where it's like that, going to an event with a lot of people seems an impossible thing at this point in time, try doing it through more of the social network of like the internet and trying to find people there, and finding smaller events to do would be my first step. I think if you are a true extrovert, go out there, but recognize that when you tell somebody, hey, let's follow up, I think of that as a bit of a social contract, to the point where I had to stop saying it a lot because I realized that I couldn't do that to the point where I was saying it. I'm like, nope. So find, if you are an overcommitter, over extrovert sometimes in those spaces, give yourself some tools prior and work on how you're going to quickly exit a conversation, not overcommit to next steps, because I find sometimes if you're over extroverted, that's something that you naturally might do, because if that personality comes out of me at an event, I'm like, oh no, what have I done?
Yeah.
And my introverted side is like, we can't do that. We are booked this weekend for an introvert day. And it's like my inner self is like, you promised.
Yeah.
You promised we wouldn't do anything this Saturday. And so recognizing what feels right for you and having an idea beforehand and having a good outfit. I know that is, it doesn't have to be expensive. It doesn't have to be something that everybody else is wearing.
Yeah.
It just has to be something that you feel good in.
Right.
And that you can go in with a little bit of armor on, because that you don't have to go in there. You can be authentic without being extremely vulnerable.
Yes.
And I think if you're an introvert, that's a really hard thing to separate. But it's sort of like putting on your armor and going into battle is how sometimes you have to look at it.
Yeah.
Because you've got a goal, you've got to get there, and like you kind of need people to help you do that. And so it's like you're doing it for yourself or you're doing it for others. It depends on your mission and your goals, but you got to go in there at some point. And so giving yourself an on-ramp to doing that is important and can be done through so many different things. And sometimes it's just going to a coffee shop near where a lot of people in one company may have their lunch break.
Yeah.
And if that is what seems better to you and that is more comfortable and that you know that you're likely to meet somebody from that organization there, that's a good first step. That's better than nothing.
Yeah, that's great. I think my biggest takeaway from this conversation is that no matter who you are, there is a way for you to network in a way that works well
Yeah.
for you, right? There's no one size fits all of like, how do I go out and network? You don't have to do it in the same way everyone else does. And two, that is something that you can plan ahead for. I feel like a lot of people think that networking is like, you're either good at it or you're not good at it. And it's like, I'm not a good networker, but there's so many things so many strategies and preparation that you can do. There's limits and boundaries you can set for yourself.
Yes.
That there are things that based on who you are, you can network in a way that is effective, but also, I mean, you're going to be out of your comfort zone a little bit, but more comfortable for you.
Right. You shouldn't be 100% perfect in those environments, or I'd say you're not pushing yourself. So if I go to a networking event, I'm also not picking those 4 people as people I've already got deep relationships with.
Right.
I got to pick 4 new people. And maybe those other conversations are me touching base with people I already have relationships with. Mm-hmm. But I'm not going to an event to just meet the same 4 people that I already know I could call up.
Right.
I would be so comfortable doing that. That would be my ideal event. But I will leave sometimes the group and people will say, she's got to go do her thing. And they'll know, like, she's got to go do her rounds. She's got people she's got to see. She probably will come back or she might not, depending how well it goes. But it's like a charge that I give myself where I'm like, okay, I can't be with you all anymore, even though you're lovely. I got to go.
That's a wrap on today's episode. If you enjoyed this conversation, make sure to subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. If you found value in today's discussion, I'd love it if you left a review. It really helps more people discover the show. Want to keep the conversation going? Connect with us on Instagram at What She's Worth for more insights, updates, and inspiration. You can also watch video episodes on YouTube. Just search for the What She's Worth channel. And if you're looking for empowering merch to rep your ambition, head over to whatshe'sworth.com to shop our latest designs. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.